Disclaimer: this content is intended for a mature audience only. Viewer discretion is advised. The night felt unusually still, as if the world had stepped back just enough to let something fragile unfold. I remember the cool metal beneath my palms, the faint warmth it still held from the day, and the quiet hum of distant traffic that never quite reached us. Everything seemed suspended: breath, thought, consequence. I wasn't supposed to feel this way, and yet there it was, undeniable, rising gently beneath my skin like a secret asking to be kept. They were strangers, but not entirely. Not in the way their presence lingered, close enough to feel but distant enough to make every second uncertain. One stood beside me, quiet, observant, my husband. His silence wasn't empty. It carried weight, permission, something unspoken that pressed against the edges of my hesitation. "Are you sure?" he murmured, his voice low, almost lost in the night. I didn't answer right away, because certainty wasn't what I felt. What I felt was awareness of breath near my ear, of a hand brushing lightly against mine as if asking a question without words, of the strange electricity that comes when boundaries blur but don't quite break. It wasn't reckless. It wasn't careless. It was deliberate in its quiet, unfolding inch by inch. Someone laughed softly, not mocking, just present. "You can step back," one of them said gently, not to me, but to him. My husband didn't move. "I don't want to," he replied, almost calmly. "I want to see where this goes." The words settled between us like a fragile bridge. I felt my pulse quicken, not from fear, but from being seen so completely, by all of them. No pretense. No hiding. Just the raw, complicated truth of wanting to feel something more than ordinary. A breeze passed, lifting a strand of my hair across my face. Fingers, careful, hesitant, moved it aside. That small gesture felt louder than anything else, like a line being crossed in the quietest way possible. I exhaled slowly. And then I leaned forward, just slightly, just enough to answer a question none of us had fully asked yet. Behind me, my husband shifted closer, his voice near my ear now, softer than before. "Say the word," he whispered. And we stopped. But I didn't say anything. Because the moment hadn't reached its end yet, it had only just begun. The moment hadn't reached its end yet, it had only just begun. I felt it in the way none of us moved right away, as if we were all listening to the same quiet signal, waiting for it to become something we could understand. My hands stayed pressed against the hood, but my body no longer felt anchored. It felt suspended, like I had stepped into a version of myself I hadn't fully met before. "I didn't think we'd actually come this far," I said softly, almost to the night itself. My husband let out a faint breath behind me. Not quite a laugh. "You say that like this wasn't your idea." "It wasn't," I replied, turning just enough to glance at him. "It was a conversation. Those don't always turn into this." "This," one of the strangers echoed gently, as if testing the word. He leaned against the side of the car, arms loosely crossed, but his eyes didn't drift. They stayed with me, not in a way that felt consuming, but attentive. Careful. Like he was reading something written between my movements. "We almost left," the other one added, his voice quieter, more thoughtful. "Back at the cafe. Remember?" I did remember. The way I had hesitated near the door. The way my husband hadn't rushed me. The way something unspoken had passed between the four of us, subtle but undeniable. It hadn't felt like danger. It had felt like standing at the edge of a choice. "I thought if we left," I admitted, "I'd spend the whole night wondering what would have happened if we didn't." "And now?" my husband asked. I swallowed, feeling the weight of his presence closer now, not possessive, not distant, but something more complicated. Something shared. "Now I'm wondering what happens if we stay." Silence settled again, but it wasn't empty. It was full of small details, the faint rustle of fabric, the rhythm of breath, the distant flicker of headlights passing somewhere far beyond us. Everything felt sharper, like my senses had been turned up just enough to make every second stretch. "You trust him?" one of the strangers asked quietly, nodding toward my husband. I didn't hesitate. "Yes. And us." That answer came slower. Not because I felt unsafe, but because trust, I realized, wasn't something that arrived all at once. It was something forming right now in the way they gave space instead of taking it, in the way no one rushed the moment forward. I'm starting to, I said. My husband stepped closer then, not interrupting, just entering the space more fully. His hand hovered near mine, not touching yet, but close enough that I could feel the warmth of it. You always did like standing on edges, he murmured. I let out a small breath, almost a smile. Only when I know you're nearby. His fingers brushed mine then light, grounding. And for a second, everything else faded except that single point of contact. But just as I leaned into it, one of the strangers shifted closer too, close enough that I could feel the change in the air between us, and suddenly, the balance we had been holding so carefully began to tilt. Not suddenly, nothing about this night felt sudden, but enough that I noticed it in the way my breath caught just slightly, in the way my thoughts stopped forming complete sentences. I became aware of how close we all were now. Not just physically, but in the fragile, invisible sense of knowing too much, too quickly. This wasn't supposed to be complicated, I said, barely above a whisper. My husband's hand finally settled over mine, steady and warm. It was always going to be. I turned my head just enough to look at him fully. There was no jealousy in his expression, no anger. But there was something else, something deeper, harder to name. Not distance, but restraint. You remember what you said, he continued quietly. A year ago. I did. The night we had sat across from each other in our dim kitchen, everything between us feeling paused. Not broken. Just unfinished. We had talked about routine, about how love can remain intact while everything else grows quieter, less vivid. I said I didn't want to feel invisible in my own life, I replied. And I said, he added, that I didn't want to be the reason you felt that way. The words settled heavily, threading the present moment to something older, unresolved. One of the strangers shifted his weight, glancing between us, not intruding, but no longer just observing. So this is about more than tonight. It always is, my husband said simply. I felt a flicker of something then, not doubt, but the realization that this wasn't just a shared curiosity. It was layered with history, with choices we hadn't fully examined until now. I didn't bring you here to fix anything, I said, my voice more certain than I expected. That's not fair to anyone. No, my husband agreed. But maybe you brought yourself here to understand something. The other stranger, quiet until now, spoke softly, his tone measured. And what do you think that is? I hesitated. Because the truth wasn't clean. It's not about them, I admitted, nodding slightly toward the two men. Not entirely. It's about whether I still recognize myself when things stop being predictable. And do you? He asked. I looked down at my hand beneath my husband's, at the way our fingers fit together out of habit and history. Then I felt the presence of the others, new, undefined, without expectation. I don't know yet. The air seemed to tighten around that answer. A car passed somewhere in the distance, its headlights briefly washing over us before fading again into darkness. For a moment, we were illuminated, every expression, every hesitation, before being returned to shadow. You can walk away, one of them said gently. No one here is holding you to anything. I know, I replied. And that was the problem. Because nothing about this felt forced. Every step, every second, it was all chosen. Which meant whatever came next wouldn't just be a moment. It would be something I'd have to carry with me. I drew in a slow breath, feeling the weight of 3 different kinds of attention, familiar, curious, and uncertain, all resting on me at once. And then, instead of stepping back, I shifted my weight forward again. It was a small movement, barely noticeable, but it changed everything. The space between us narrowed, not just in distance, but in intention. I could feel it in the way no one spoke right away, as if words would only disrupt what was building naturally, quietly, with a kind of gravity none of us could ignore anymore. My husband's hand tightened slightly around mine, not to stop me, not to pull me back, but to remind me he was still there. Still part of this. Still choosing to stand in the same moment with me. You don't have to prove anything, he said softly, his voice closer now, steadier than before. I'm not, I replied, though my voice wavered just enough to betray the storm underneath. That's the problem. I don't know what I'm doing this for. One of the strangers stepped just a fraction closer, not touching, just present enough that I could feel the warmth of him, the quiet awareness in the way he moved carefully, like approaching something fragile rather than claiming it. Maybe it's not about a reason, he said. Maybe it's about whether you let yourself feel it at all. Feel it. The words echoed louder than they should have. Because feeling it meant letting go of control, of the version of myself that always understood the rules, the outcomes, the safe edges of every decision. And standing here now, there were no clear edges. Just a slow, rising intensity that asked for honesty instead of certainty. I've spent so long being predictable, I admitted, more to myself than anyone else. Even when I didn't want to be. My husband let out a quiet breath against my shoulder. You think I haven't noticed? I turned slightly toward him again, searching his face. Then why didn't you stop this? He met my gaze without hesitation. Because I don't want a version of you that feels smaller just to make things easier. That landed deeper than anything else had. For a moment, everything else, the strangers, the night, the tension fell back just enough for me to see him clearly. Not distant. Not detached. Just open in a way that was almost harder to face than resistance would have been. You're not afraid? I asked. A pause. Of losing you, he said quietly. Yes. The honesty of it pulled something tight in my chest. But I think I'd lose you faster, he continued, if I asked you to stay the same just because it's safer. Silence followed, but it wasn't empty, it was full, pressing in from all sides. The second stranger shifted slightly, his voice lower now, more careful. And what about you? He asked me. What are you afraid of? I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out at first. Because the truth wasn't simple. It wasn't just fear of change. It was fear of what I might discover if I let this moment carry me further, about myself, about us, about everything I thought was steady. I'm afraid, I started, my voice barely holding steady, that I won't be able to step back once I understand what this feels like. No one moved. Not away. Not closer. Just waiting. And the night seemed to lean in with them, as if even it wanted to hear what I would do next. The night seemed to lean in with them, as if even it wanted to hear what I would do next. I'm afraid, I started again, but the words felt heavier now, like they carried more than just the moment. And then, unexpectedly, my husband's hand slipped away from mine. Not abruptly. Not coldly. Just, deliberately. The absence of his touch was louder than anything he could have said. I turned toward him, confused at first. Why did you? You should feel this without me holding you in place, he said, his voice calm, but there was something restrained beneath it now. Something tighter. Otherwise, it's not really your choice. That wasn't what I expected. I thought he would stay close. Ground me. Be the constant in the middle of all this uncertainty. Instead, he stepped back. Just one step, but it stretched the distance between us into something unfamiliar. The shift rippled through everything. The strangers noticed it too. The air changed. You're letting go, one of them asked him quietly. My husband gave a small, almost unreadable smile. No, he said. I'm just not standing in the way anymore. But it didn't feel that simple. Because when I looked at him now, I saw it, the thing he hadn't shown before. Not jealousy. Not regret. But a question. And worse, a test. You're doing this on purpose, I said, my voice sharpening slightly. You want to see what I'll do? He didn't deny it. I want to see you or when no one's guiding you back, he replied. The words landed like a quiet fracture. For a moment, I couldn't tell if I felt free or exposed. One of the strangers stepped in slightly, his presence more defined now, but still careful. That's not entirely fair, he said, glancing between us. You're asking her to make a choice while you step out of it. I'm still here, my husband said. But not the same way, the stranger replied. Silence. Tension. And suddenly, this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all of us, how we stood, what we meant, what we were willing to risk without fully understanding the cost. I didn't realize this was a test, I said quietly. It's not, my husband said quickly, but then paused. Not exactly. That sounds like it is, I replied. Another flicker of headlights passed in the distance, briefly illuminating his face again, and this time, I saw it clearly. He wasn't just watching. He was bracing. I trust you, he said, softer now. But trust doesn't mean I don't want to understand you. And if I don't understand myself yet? I asked. No answer came immediately. Because that was the truth none of us could solve in this moment. The second stranger, who had been quieter, finally spoke again, his tone thoughtful, almost cautious. Then maybe this isn't about choosing a direction, he said. Maybe it's about whether you're willing to stay in the uncertainty long enough to find one. I felt that settle deep. Because leaving would be easy now. So would stepping forward. But staying right here in this tension, in this unspoken complexity, that was something else entirely. And for the first time, I realized that might be the hardest choice of all. That might be the hardest choice of all. The realization didn't come like a shock, it settled slowly, like the night air pressing against my skin, undeniable and steady. I looked at each of them, one by one. The two strangers, present, careful, waiting without expectation. And then my husband, no longer reaching for me, no longer guiding, just standing there with that same quiet steadiness, and something else now. Something rawer. You said you trust me, I murmured, my voice softer than before. But this doesn't feel like trust. He didn't interrupt. It feels like you're preparing yourself, I continued, for a version of me you're not sure you'll recognize. That landed. I saw it in the way his shoulders shifted, in the way his gaze dropped for just a second before finding me again. You're not wrong, he admitted. The honesty of it stung, but not in the way I expected. Because it wasn't accusation. It was fear, finally spoken. And you, he asked quietly. Are you still sure you recognize yourself right now? That question didn't need time. Because I did know. Not completely. Not perfectly. But enough. I recognize that I'm not searching for something new, I said slowly. I'm trying to understand what I already have and whether I've been fully present in it. The words felt clearer as they left me. Stronger. The strangers exchanged a glance, not awkward, not disappointed, just understanding. One of them nodded slightly. Then maybe this was never about us. It wasn't, I said gently. And then I turned fully toward my husband. The distance between us was still there, but it didn't feel like a test anymore. It felt like a choice waiting to be made. You stepped back, I said, to see who I'd be without you holding me in place. He didn't move. And I stepped forward, I continued, to see if I'd lose myself without you there. A quiet pause. Then I took a step toward him. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Just certain. And I didn't, I said. Something in his expression shifted, subtle, but unmistakable. Not relief exactly. Not victory. Just recognition. But before either of us could close that final space, one of the strangers spoke again, softer this time. You know, he said, most people don't realize this until it's already too late. We both turned slightly. What? My husband asked. That wanting to feel seen somewhere else, he continued, usually starts with not feeling fully seen where you already are. The words hung there. And then, my husband let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh, but not quite. I never stopped seeing you, he said to me. I held his gaze. I know, I replied. A pause. And that might be the problem, I added softly. Because being seen wasn't the same as being understood. And in that moment, even as I stood closer to him than before, I realized the truth we hadn't faced yet still remained between us, quiet and unresolved. For a long moment, no one spoke. The night, which had felt so charged before, began to soften again, like a held breath finally released. The distant hum of the road returned, quieter now, almost comforting in its familiarity. I looked at the two strangers, really looked this time, not as possibilities, not as questions, but as people who had, in their own quiet way, held space for something fragile and complicated. "Thank you," I said gently. One of them gave a small smile. "For what?" "For not asking for more than I could give." The other nodded, understanding passing between us without the need for anything else. They stepped back, not abruptly, not awkwardly, just enough to return the moment to where it belonged. With us. My husband and I stood facing each other again, the distance finally closing, not because it disappeared on its own, but because we chose to cross it. "I didn't realize how much we'd stopped talking," I admitted. "We didn't stop," he said quietly. "We just got used to understanding without asking." "And that wasn't enough," I replied. He shook his head slightly. "No, it wasn't. There was no blame in it. No sharp edges left. Just a shared recognition that something quiet had been missing, and that tonight hadn't broken anything. It had revealed it. I thought letting you go, even for a moment, would show me what I was afraid of," he said. "And did it?" I asked. He met my eyes, steady now. "It showed me that I don't want a version of you that stays just because it's easier." I let that settle. "And I don't want a version of us," I said, "that only works when nothing changes." A faint smile touched his lips, not out of relief, but something deeper. Something earned. We didn't rush toward each other. We didn't need to. The space between us felt different now, not uncertain, not fragile. Just honest. Behind us, I heard the soft sound of footsteps fading, the strangers leaving as quietly as they had entered. No grand exits. No lingering glances. Just the quiet understanding that their role in this moment had ended. And somehow, that felt right. My husband reached for my hand again. This time, I took it without hesitation. Not because I needed grounding, but because I wanted connection. We stood there for a while longer, not speaking, letting the silence settle into something calmer, something clearer. The night hadn't changed us completely, but it had shifted something important, something we could no longer ignore. And as we finally turned to leave, walking side by side into the quiet road ahead, I realized sometimes you don't lose yourself by stepping to the edge. You find the truth of who you are by choosing where to stand.